Imagine this. I am 72 years old. I get off the bus after a week away and hope to sink into a cozy sofa covered with a blanket in the house I built with my late husband. Instead, I discover something that shook me to my core and left me in shock. My own son and his wife had betrayed me in the most despicable way. At that moment, I felt a fire ignite inside me. I wasn't going to just accept this, I was going to take back what they wanted to take from me. In the end, I turned betrayal into triumph. And I'm ready to share my story with you from the very beginning. I'm Eleanor Thompson, 72 years young, a retired librarian who's traded dusty books for arranging roses. I love my quilting and tending my garden. Those petunias don't plant themselves. I just gotten back from visiting my cousin Mabel in Oregon, a week of her famous blackberry cobbler and gossip about our old high school pals. I was bone-tired but happy, dreaming of sinking into my cozy quilt-covered couch with a steaming cup of chamomile tea. Maybe even stitching a new patch on my latest quilt, a patchwork of blues and yellows that reminded me of summer skies. The bus dropped me off at the corner and I shuffled toward my home of 40 years, the one my late husband Thomas, a carpenter with hands that could carve a bird out of a scrap of oak, and I built from the ground up. That house held every memory. Daniel's first steps in the hallway, Thomas's laughter over burnt pancakes in the kitchen, my book club arguing over Jane Austen in the living room. I could already smell the lavender from my garden, but as I rounded the corner, my heart did a somersault and landed in my throat. There on the curb sat my 4 suitcases, neat as you please, like they were waiting for a yard sale. My old leather one, the one Thomas bought me for our honeymoon, had a folded note tucked under its handle, flapping in the breeze. I hobbled closer, my knees creaking louder than the floorboards in our attic. The note was in Sophia's sharp, slanted handwriting, my daughter-in-law, the freelance artist who collects modern art like it's going out of style. It read, "If you wish to remain, the shed is available. Your devoted daughter-in-law." I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks. My heart stopped, then thumped like a drum. The shed? That drafty, spider-infested box where I stored my gardening tools? I'd been paying the mortgage on this house every month, ever since I signed it over to Daniel and Sophia after Thomas passed 4 years ago. I thought I was helping my son, the graphic designer with a taste for fancy watches, and his growing family. Apparently, I was funding my own eviction. My hands shook like leaves in a storm as I pulled out my ancient flip phone. Yes, I'm that old lady who refuses a smartphone. I dialed the bank, my fingers fumbling over the buttons. "First Federal, this is Linda," a chipper voice answered. "Linda, darlin', it's Eleanor Thompson. Can you check if my mortgage payment went through last week?" My voice wobbled and I felt a flush creeping up my neck. "Yes, ma'am," she said, clicking away. "Payment of the usual amount cleared on Friday, right on schedule." I whispered a thank you and hung up, staring at my suitcases as thunder rumbled overhead. Like the sky was grumbling about this mess too. I stood there, 72 years old, in my sensible loafers and cardigan, feeling like the ground had vanished. Betrayed by my own family, my Daniel who I'd rocked through fevers, and Sophia, who I'd baked cookies for when they were dating. Then, to add insult to injury, a neighbor kid, maybe 12, zipped by on a skateboard, his hoodie flapping. He glanced at my suitcases and smirked. "Nice yard sale, Grandma." Oh, that little whippersnapper. It was a gut punch, sharper than the time I found a worm in my salad. My cheeks burned, but I managed a weak chuckle. Eleanor Thompson doesn't cry in public. That moment, with storm clouds gathering in my life on the curb, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war, and I wasn't about to wave a white flag. Let me paint you a picture, folks, of the house that was my whole world, now snatched away like a library book on overdue notice. This house, where I'd lived for 40 years, was more than bricks and mortar. It was where my Thomas, bless his soul. We picked every light fixture, from the brass chandelier in the dining room to the little sconces in the hall that flickered like fireflies. We planted rose bushes in the front yard, their petals red as the lipstick I wore on our wedding day. When Daniel was a boy, we'd host my book club here, debating Austen and Hemingway over my homemade lemon squares, the kids giggling in the backyard. I stood in that chilly shed, the one Sophia's note had banished me to, my breath puffing in the damp air. Inside, I found a cot that looked like it belonged in a thrift store reject pile, a wobbly table barely holding a chipped lamp, and a stack of cardboard boxes labeled Eleanor's things in Sophia's sharp scrawl. My quilts, hand-stitched labors of love, each square a memory of late nights with Thomas or Daniel's school plays, were crammed into garbage bags, some torn at the seams like my heart. I ran my fingers over a blue patch from my old sundress, and my eyes stung. My gardening tools, the ones I used to tend my petunias and lavender, were gone, probably stuffed in the attic with the cobwebs. I remembered Sophia's updates over the years. My favorite reading nook, with its cushy armchair perfect for curling up with a mystery novel, had been turned into their gym, complete with a treadmill that screamed modern chic. Daniel, my boy, had started dropping hints about retirement homes, saying, "Mom, you'd love not worrying about yard work." Yard work. As if my roses were a burden. It was dawning on me, slow and heavy like a fog rolling in, that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment slight. They'd been planning this, chipping away at my place in my own home. Sophia, with her modern art obsession, had replaced my cozy curtains with stark white blinds, claiming they were in style. My Thomas's wood carvings, a delicate deer, a tiny boat, had vanished from the mantel, probably boxed up somewhere. Every change felt like a tiny theft, a piece of me erased. Then, rummaging through a box, my fingers brushed something glossy. I pulled out a crumpled real estate flyer, and my stomach dropped like I'd missed a step. It listed my house for sale. The price tag was a punch to the gut, more than I'd ever imagined. My blood boiled, hot as the tea kettle I'd left on too long once. They weren't just sidelining me. They were wiping me out, selling my memories to the highest bidder. I clutched that flyer, my hand shaking, and thought, "Oh, Daniel, Sophia, you've got no idea who you're messing with." My phone buzzed and I fumbled it out of my cardigan pocket, hoping for an apology from my son Daniel. Instead, his text hit me like a sour note on a piano. "Mom, we need room for Sophia's studio. The shed's got everything you need. Don't make this a problem." I stared at those words, my eyes prickling. The shed? With its creaky cot and grimy window that looked out on my house, the one I'd been paying the mortgage on for years, even after signing it over to Daniel and Sophia. I sank onto that cot, the springs squeaking like a rusty gate, and stared through the smudged window at the rose bushes Thomas and I planted. My tears came then, hot and quiet, spilling down my cheeks like rain on a library's skylight. I'd tutored their daughter Lily through fractions and long division, spending hours at the kitchen table with flashcards and cookies. When Thomas's carpentry business hit a rough patch, I sold my rare first edition books, my prized Jane Austen, my dog-eared Bronte, to cover Daniel's art school tuition. I'd done it all to see him smile, to give him a future. And now I was a nuisance, shoved into a shed like an old broom? My chest ached like someone had yanked a quilt square right out of my heart. I pulled out my flip phone and called Clara, my best friend, a retired teacher who lives for her book club and can argue about Dickens like nobody's business. My voice cracked as I said, "Clara, they've stuck me in the shed." She gasped. "Eleanor, what's happened?" Her tone was all fire and brimstone, like she was ready to march over with a chalkboard eraser and set things right. "I'm there in 15 minutes, she said, and I could hear her keys jangling already. I sat there, clutching my phone, trying to hold it together. But the hurt was deep, like finding a tear in your favorite quilt you can't mend. As I waited, I glanced outside at my suitcases, still on the curb where Sophia's note had left them. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was mad as a wet hen. I wanted payback, not just for me, but for every stitch of love I'd poured into that family. Rinses. Clara, my best friend, a retired teacher who runs her book club like a general, whisked me to her cozy bungalow, where the smell of her famous lemon bars greeted me like a warm hug. I sat at her oak kitchen table, its surface scratched from years of her grading papers, and spilled the whole sorry tale. My suitcases, Sophia's note, Daniel's cold text. My voice cracked like an old record as I described the shed, my quilts and garbage bags. Clara's eyes narrowed, her teacup clinking hard against its saucer. "Eleanor, that's your home," she said, her voice sharp as a tack. "You're still paying the mortgage on it." Over those lemon bars, tart and sweet, just like Clara's wit, we pieced together how my son Daniel and his wife Sophia had been chipping away at my place in that house. It started small. My book club, where we'd sip tea and debate Agatha Christie, got complaints from Sophia about being too noisy, as if her blaring jazz records were any quieter. I'd been a fool, thinking my mortgage payments were helping Daniel and Sophia build a life. Instead, they were paving the way to push me out. Clara leaned forward, her gray curls bouncing as she shook her head. You've been their bank, Eleanor, and they've been cashing out your memories. Her words hit like a splash of cold water. I stared at my hands, still smudged with dirt from my garden, and felt my hurt harden into something else. Then Clara dropped a bombshell that made my jaw drop like a bad plot twist. At her last book club, Sophia showed up, tipsy on rose, her cheeks flushed as she bragged about selling my house to buy a swanky Hillcrest condo with a view. She said it's their ticket to the big time, Clara scoffed, mimicking Sophia's airy tone. My blood turned to fire, hot as the July sun on my rose bushes. They weren't just sidelining me. They were selling my life for a fancy address. My hurt morphed into rage, and I knew I wasn't just going to pack up and shuffle off. Oh no, I wanted them to regret this, to feel the sting they dealt me. Clara, ever the strategist, grinned like she was planning a checkmate. My nephew Nathan's a lawyer, specializes in senior advocacy, loves a good chess game. He'll help you plot your comeback. I pictured Daniel and Sophia's smug faces when I turned the tables. This old librarian had a few tricks left. Clara drove me to her nephew Nathan's law office. The place smelled like old books, a comforting whiff of dusty pages and leather bindings that reminded me of my librarian days. Nathan, a lawyer who fights for seniors and plays chess like it's his religion, had a desk piled with papers and a coffee mug shaped like a knight. I liked him instantly. I handed over my bank statements and watched Nathan's sharp eyes scan the numbers. Eleanor, he said, leaning back in his creaky chair, you've been paying the mortgage on a house you don't legally own since you signed it over to Daniel and Sophia. That's grounds for an equitable lien. My ears perked up like a daisy in spring. A lien? That could stop my son and his wife Sophia from selling my house. My plan started to bloom. Stop the mortgage payments, slap a lien on the house, and block their big Hillcrest condo dreams. I could almost taste the satisfaction, tart as Clara's lemon bars. Then came a twist that made my heart skip like a scratched record. Nathan flipped through his notes and grinned. There's a forgotten joint account here from you and Thomas. It's got enough savings to cover a few months' rent if you need to move temporarily. I gasped, clutching my purse. Thomas, gone 4 years, had left me a lifeline, like one of his carved sparrows soaring back to me. It felt like he was still watching out, his calloused hands guiding me from beyond. My eyes missed it, but I chuckled. Well, Thomas always did hide surprises in the strangest places. I decided then to confront Daniel and Sophia, not to patch things up. Oh honey, that ship had sailed. But to see their smug faces when I dropped my lean bombshell. I wanted them to know this old librarian wasn't checking out quietly. That night, Clara called, her voice crackling with mischief. Eleanor, you won't believe this. I was scrolling online, and Sophia posted one of her garish paintings. Caption, funded by our new condo. My jaw dropped. That woman had the gall to flaunt my house's sale like it was her personal art grant. My blood fired up, hot as a July sidewalk. That post was like gasoline on my resolve, and I was ready to light a match, figuratively of course. Nathan's lien was my first move, and I was ready to play this game. I'd stopped the mortgage payments on the house and I was ready to face them. I rang the doorbell of my own home. 40 years of memories behind that oak door, and my pulse raced like I was checking out a thriller novel. The chime echoed and I clutched my purse. Sophia answered, her fake smile as stiff as her overpriced canvas prints. Eleanor, we didn't expect you, she said, her voice sweeter than store-bought pie but twice as artificial. Her earrings, some angular modern art nonsense, glinted in the porch light. I need to talk about the house you're selling, I said, my voice steadier than my shaking knees. Daniel shuffled out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, his expensive watch catching the light. He looked nervous, his eyes darting like a kid caught sneaking cookies. Mom, what's this about? He asked, his tone wobbling like my old sewing machine. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into a cold pool, and laid it out. I stopped the mortgage payments. This house is mine, not yours. The air went still like the moment before a storm. Sophia scoffed, tossing her hair like she was in one of her art gallery shows. We didn't ask you to pay, she said, her words sharp as a paper cut. Daniel nodded, avoiding my eyes. You gave us the house, Mom. It's ours now. I felt my heart crack, but I wasn't backing down. Thomas would be disappointed in you, Daniel. I snapped, my voice hot as a kettle left too long. This house was our life. And you're selling it like it's nothing. Their faces fell, Sophia's smile vanishing faster than my rosebushes in a frost, Daniel's jaw tightening like he'd bitten a lemon. Sophia recovered quick, folding her arms. You chose to help Eleanor. That's on you. Her words stung, but I held my ground, my gardening boots planted firm. I turned to leave, my cardigan catching on the porch railing. And as I stepped down the driveway, I overheard them through the open window. Daniel's voice was low, hissing. This is your fault, Sophia, leaving that real estate flyer where she could find it. Sophia snapped back. You didn't stop me. Their arguing was like music to my ears, a crack in their perfect plan. I chuckled, a grim little laugh, feeling a spark of satisfaction hotter than a summer day. They thought they could erase me, but this old librarian was rewriting the story. My quilting and gardening usually kept my spirits bright, but the sting of my son Daniel and his wife Sophia's betrayal still burned like a misplaced pin in a quilt. Nathan had filed the equitable lien on my house. That lien was like a padlock on Daniel and Sophia's plan to sell my home for their fancy condo. And oh, did it feel good to throw a wrench in their works. I started working at Blossoms, arranging bouquets of lilies and peonies, my hands dusted with pollen instead of regret. The shop was a haven, with its wooden counter cluttered with ribbon spools, and the soft hum of customers chatting about their gardens. Tying a satin bow around a dozen roses soothed my soul, like stitching a new quilt square. Then one afternoon as I was trimming stems, Daniel walked in, his fancy watch glinting under the shop's lights. He looked desperate, his face pale as a daisy petal. Mom, he said, his voice low, you've got to remove the lien and keep paying the mortgage until we sell. I laughed. Daniel, I want my home back, I said. His eyes widened and he leaned closer, his cologne sharp. If you don't, you might not see Lily much. My heart cracked like a dropped teacup. Lily, my granddaughter, was my sunshine. But I held firm, my hands steady on the shears. That's not how this works, I said, my voice cool as a spring breeze. Then came a twist that made my jaw drop. The bank called as I was locking up the shop, the neon sign flickering outside. Mrs. Thompson, this is Margaret from First Federal, the voice said. We've got a problem. Someone tried to forge your signature to reinstate the mortgage payments. My knees wobbled and I gripped the counter. Who? I asked, though I knew. Your son, Daniel, she confirmed. I could have sworn I heard Thomas's chuckle from the beyond. Nathan jumped on it when I told him, his chess player mind already plotting. We can threaten fraud charges, he said, his pen tapping like a metronome. I upped the ante, telling him to demand Daniel and Sophia sell the house back to me for the mortgage balance. No more, no less. That night my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Sophia. Her voice slurred from too much wine. You selfish hag, she spat. Ruining our future. I saved it for Nathan, grinning like I just planted a perfect row of petunias. They thought they could outsmart me, but unfortunately for them I was smarter. They caved, selling me the house back for the mortgage balance. And let me tell you, signing those papers felt sweeter than a fresh-baked peach pie. I moved back into my knees creaking as I hauled boxes up the porch steps. First thing I did was rehang Thomas's carvings. A tiny deer on the mantel, a sailboat in the hall, each one gleaming like a memory polished bright. My garden got some love too. I planted new petunias, their purple blooms winking at me like old friends. One sunny afternoon as I was pinning a quilt square, the doorbell chimed. There stood Daniel, looking like a puppy caught in the rain. He shuffled his feet, his loafers scuffed, and said, Mom, we didn't get the Hillcrest condo. Our credit's shot. He paused, then added, Sophia's pregnant again, due in February. My heart twinged, but I kept my face steady. He went on, his voice low. You chose a house over us, Mom. I set my needle down, looked him square in the eye, and said, I chose not to be forgotten, Daniel. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Lily can visit sometimes if that's okay. It was a small olive branch, brittle as a dry twig, but no apology came. I said, she's always welcome, and watched him drive off, my chest heavy with a mix of love and loss. Then came a twist that made me cackle like a hen who'd laid a golden egg. Clara, my best friend, called me up. Eleanor, Sophia's so-called art. It's plagiarized. She copied designs from an obscure gallery, and the internet's tearing her apart. Sophia's freelance career, built on her modern art obsession, was crumbling faster than my old pie crust recipe. I couldn't help but grin. Karma's got a way of pruning the weeds. That evening I hosted a backyard dinner under my old oak tree, its leaves rustling like applause. Clara was there, toasting with her iced tea, along with Nathan and my florist friends, their aprons swapped for sundresses. We sat at a table covered with my favorite quilt, plates piled with Clara's lemon bars and my homemade potato salad. We raised our glasses and Clara said, "To Eleanor's comeback." My heart swelled warm as a summer day. I was home quilting again, my hands stitching new stories. But Daniel's betrayal still stung, like a thorn you can't quite pull out. It's been a year since I took back my home, the one I built with my late husband Thomas, whose oak carvings still grace my mantel. After Daniel and Sophia's betrayal, kicking me out for their condo dreams, I thought I'd close the book on my son. But life's got more twists than a mystery novel. And this chapter's a doozy. A year later I was pinning a new quilt square, blues and greens like Thomas's old flannel shirts, when the doorbell chimed. There stood Daniel, looking like a wilted daisy. His eyes were red, his loafers scuffed, and he carried a duffel bag. "Mom," he said, voice low, "Sophia and I split up. I've got nowhere to go." My heart did a flip, part pity, part wariness. He'd hurt me deep, but he was still my boy. I thought of the shed they'd banished me to, and a wry smile crept up. "There's the barn out back," I said, pointing to the old structure where I stored gardening tools. "It's got a cot and a lamp. You can stay there." His jaw dropped, but necessity's a hard teacher. He nodded, mumbling, "Thanks, Mom," and shuffled off, his bag dragging like his pride. A month later I was tending my petunias when Daniel helped carry my watering can, his hands awkward but trying. We talked small things at first, about Lily's school, his new job at a print shop. Then he said, "I was wrong, Mom. I let Sophia push you out. I'm sorry." His voice cracked and I saw my little boy again, the one I'd bandaged after bike falls. My heart softened like warm dough. "I forgive you, Daniel," I said, squeezing his hand. "But trust takes time." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and I felt a weight lift like snipping a thorn from a rose. Then came a twist. Daniel was fighting for custody of Lily, my sweet granddaughter. Sophia, whose art career tanked after her plagiarism scandal, was unfit, the court said. Daniel won and Lily's giggles filled my house again. We all moved in together, me, Daniel, Lily, and even the new baby born after the split. The barn became Daniel's art studio, not a home, and we fixed up the guest room for him and the kids. At dinner, with Clara's lemon bars and my potato salad on my quilt-covered table, we laughed, Lily drawing on napkins, Daniel carving a tiny boat like Thomas used to. The betrayal still stings, but family's messy like a patchwork quilt. We're stitching it back together one day at a time.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What's your take on forgiving family after a big betrayal? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.